Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the February State Board work session. We'll now come to order. Denise, will you please call roll?
Lisa Fricke.
Present.
Patsy Ko-Johns.
Present.
Rachel Wise.
Present.
John Witzel.
Present.
Molly O'Halloran.
Present.
Patricia Tim.
Yes.
Maureen Nichols. Patrick McPherson.
Yes.
7 present, 1 absent.
Thank you very much. Information regarding the Open Meetings Act is posted on the east wall of this room on the south side of the door. Live web streaming will be made available through the State Board of Education website. Also, just as a reminder, board members to engage their microphones before speaking and to turn off any of their and turn them off when they're done speaking, and please turn off your cell phones. Thank you very much. Now we'll move into the Commissioner's report and agenda overview. Commissioner, did you want a brief consent agenda process?
Yeah, just as a reminder, you can fill out the pink form if there's any items on the consent agenda that you would like to take up separately or otherwise would have some questions on. Just go ahead and fill that out and put it in the basket over there where Scott Summers is normally at. Also, the report on rules is attached to the agenda as well. You can see that we've had some public hearings in January since we last met, Rule 24, Rule 21, and Rule 11. We also have rules awaiting approval in the Attorney General's office. I believe that's just Rule 15 right now, and rules that are now in front of the Governor and Secretary of State include Rule 71, Rule 72, and Rule 23. That's all I have, President.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Board priorities, Ryan Ford.
I don't have anything.
Nothing, Ryan. Thank you very much, sir. Standing committee reports, Maureen, please report on the AQuest Teaching and Learning Domain Committee meeting.
Our domain met with 2 proposed action items for tomorrow and 1 discussion item on the agenda. The first one is on Rule 24. The committee reviewed revisions to Rule 24 regulations for issuance of certificates and permits to teach, provide special services, and administer in Nebraska schools. The recommendation is to adopt the revisions to the career and technical education regulations. Pat Madsen will share some more information if she is here. I'm not sure she is.
She is coming right there. We said, come on down, Pat Madsen. He's like, the price is right.
I'll try to do a better job of getting out of here than I did in the previous meeting. I am fine, thank you. For the record, I am Pat Madsen, Nebraska Department of Education, Adult Program Services. And the proposed changes to Rule 24 include agricultural education, 006.02. There were language revisions incorporated into the work experience requirements, and those were made to align with federal regulations. The Business Marketing and Information Technology endorsement, BMIT, 006.11, now requires a minimum of 51 semester hours, and again, the work experience requirement language was revised to align with federal regulations. Early Childhood Education, 006.16. Early Childhood Inclusive, the field endorsement, 006.17. And Elementary Education, 006.20. Language was added to those 3 endorsements, which now includes identification of deficiencies and effective instructional and intervention strategies related to mathematics and reading coursework. And those were at the request of the board. Those were included at the request of the board. Family and Consumer Sciences Occupational is the new name for Family and Consumer Sciences, 006.24. And the name change is to reflect the new work experience requirement that was added to align with federal regulations. And it now also requires a minimum of 3 semester hours in Family and Consumer Sciences methods, which was at the request of the teachers on the ad hoc committee. Family and Consumer Sciences was the only career and technical education endorsement that did not have a work experience requirement prior to this time, and now it will. Health Sciences Supplemental Endorsement 006.28 now requires a minimum of 9 semester hours of health sciences coursework, 3 semester hours of Principles of Career and Technical Education, and 3 semester hours of coordination and supervision of work-based learning. And the work experience requirement language was revised to align with federal regulations. Information Technology 006.31, language revisions to align with all of the career and technical education endorsements. Skilled and Technical Sciences 006.51 is the new name for the former Industrial Technology Education endorsement. It now requires a minimum of 48 semester hours, and the work experience requirement language was revised to align with federal regulations. Skilled and Technical Sciences, Skilled Specific, is the new name for the previous Skilled and Technical Sciences supplemental endorsement. It remains a supplemental endorsement, 006.52. The career fields were revised to reflect profession changes. Added coursework requirement in organization and management of Skills USA student organization. The work experience requirement language was revised to align with federal regulations. And this is a supplemental endorsement to agricultural education or to a Skilled and Technical Sciences endorsement. And one reason this was done is because we have such a shortage of Skilled and Technical Sciences teachers in Nebraska. So this would allow, for example, an agricultural education endorsed teacher the opportunity to also teach Skilled and Technical Sciences courses with the addition of this supplemental endorsement. Then other proposed changes in Rule 24, Career Education 006.12. There was some language clarification. Basic business, horticulture, vocational special needs, and curriculum supervisor endorsements were eliminated based on recommendations of ad hoc committees and the Nebraska Council on Teacher Education. We removed shall from all definitions and endorsement language, and then there were some non-substantive revisions to enhance consistency and to address numeric and alphabetical placement. And I should tell you too that we missed one shall, and so we did catch it when we were doing the clean version, so there was, and I can't even remember where it was, but we did get that one too. And we're very sorry that we missed that one, but there were lots of shalls in that rule. So, any questions?
Board members, any questions to Pat? Okay. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
The
I'll try to do
committee
this quick.
recommends making these revisions to Rule 24 tomorrow. The committee reviewed revisions to Rule 21, regulations for the issuance of certificates and permits to teach, provide special services, and administer in Nebraska schools. The recommendation is to adopt the revisions to the teacher certificate regulations, and Kevin Peters is here to share more information to you.
Thank you. Proposed revisions to Rule 21, we have 2 of them that we've suggested this time. The first one involves using community college or regular college credit to renew a Nebraska certificate, because we've had some people caught in having to take coursework as a result of their teaching at either the college or community college level. Now we would recognize that as similar teaching experience and be able to renew their certificate. That thereby would increase our pool of people coming back, or could potentially come back, to K-12 education once they tested the waters at the other levels. The second change is a revision to add a new permit, a military teaching permit. The military teaching permit is as a result of feedback we received as a group of qualified individuals that were choosing, because of all the Nebraska requirements and the length of time that they were willing to be here in Nebraska due to their military deployment here. They would not, in many cases, choose to teach in Nebraska. They would choose to teach in Iowa. So we're trying to capture a group of experienced teachers that would be available by looking at this and giving them a 3-year permit to teach, and then after the 3 years, they would then have to meet requirements if they chose to stay longer than that. They would be responsible to show a teaching certificate and 2 years teaching experience in another state or in another location if it was elsewhere in the world. Submitting a verification of employment contract already offered by a Nebraska district, and then some evidence of military connection that they have here and their location. So we feel that will help us probably recruit 20 to 30 experienced teachers a year. So that could mount up over time if they stay that long. So we asked that, and we also, as Pat said, missed one shall in our changes from shall to must. So on 5.131, there was one more needing to be added that was not in the original document. Any
Board
questions?
members, any questions? Rachel?
Yeah, I just want to report out some of the discussion since our legislative committee had talked about LB 1135 earlier today, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. We did have a brief conversation about the concept that Senator Vargas has presented in LB 1135 and put that on a future agenda to have more in-depth discussion about what kinds of processes might there be to look at alternative certification in different capacities. And Dr. Peters did a great job in some of the research and background that's already been done by the department, but how we can look at that in more depth down the road through through the Teaching and Learning Committee. So I just wanted the committee members on the legislative committee know that we did have that discussion today.
Patrick?
I'm just a little confused. I'm trying to make sure there's not a catch-22 in there. You said that the applicant could bring a request for the certificate if they'd already signed a contract with a school. Wouldn't the school require that you have that certificate to teach before
Well,
you sign?
it would be a job offer, is what
Okay,
we're
a
saying.
job
The-
offer, okay.
The job offer
All right.
is sent in by the school district,
Okay.
and then the applicant puts the application in.
All right, I was just trying to make sure there.
I just misspoke there a little bit.
Okay,
all
thank
right?
you.
Okay.
Anyone else? John?
Thank you. I just want to say this rule change is a long time change in coming in regards, it's been needed for a long time with all of our, if you will, military experience. And also, I think it's interesting that the wing commander's wife is a certified, experienced teacher at Offutt Air Force Base. And she indicated there were several other teachers in her situation that were anxious to get going. So, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks.
And again, the committee recommends making these revisions to Rule 21 tomorrow. The committee continued to discuss the civic readiness definition. The commissioners share that there are current legislative bills that have a correlation to the civics readiness definition discussion. We have asked staff to engage some stakeholders who were originally asked to be part of the ad hoc or part of the Civics Readiness Definition Committee that we have not yet heard back from. And we want to ensure that they have the opportunity to contribute if they wish to do so. And our goal is to bring forth more information to you at the March meeting. And that concludes my.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you very much, ma'am. Next, we'll move to Molly. Please report on the AQuest Student Success and Access Domain Committee meeting, please.
The committee had two recommendations. The first is item 3.2A.1, to grant the commissioner the authority to sign a contract with the State Office of Chief Information Officer. This is a result of a grant from the United States Department of Agriculture for nutrition services to improve the direct certification matching system for students attending Nebraska schools. The source of funds for this contract is federal funds. And is Sharon here or Diane Stumer? No, okay. Yeah, okay. I tell you what, they'll show up, and then if we have questions, they'll be able to answer. We did, as a committee, recommend granting the commissioner this authority to sign the contract. And the second agenda item is 3.2A.2, and This is to approve federal discretionary Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and state general funded grants and memorandum of understanding. And these are federal discretionary dollars intended to improve or expand services to infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities. The grants do total in excess of $8 million. And Steve Milliken and Greg Prochaska? Yeah, they're here. Did I say it right? Prochaska?
That's one way.
How do you say it?
Usually Prohaska, but I.
Prohaska. Okay.
All kinds.
No, see, Prohaska. Would you two like to come up? We'll just go, if we have any questions from my board members. This is again for IDA federal funding. Do you want to just give a brief synopsis?
Sure. Glad to. Thank you. The discretionary dollars, grants, projects, Part B and C. Part C is birth to 3, and then Part B is 3 to 21. And discretionary projects, and these dollars have actually been with us for a great period of time. In fact, it goes back to probably 1975 when the federal law first started, mandated. But these projects and these dollars have been with us for a great deal of time. They are across all categories of special education, if you will, to provide additional supports to areas of which we have identified over time, to districts and service units, staff development, professional development, for districts to be, more empowered to provide additional services and supports, both to infants, toddlers, and kids in school programs. It's everything from transition services to parent information services, but across all particular areas.
Any questions? Rachel?
Yeah, Steve, have you ever utilized, as you know, we've had a lot of discussion around dyslexia. Have you ever utilized some of those funds for professional development and training in better understanding, identification, early identification, intervention with children that have reading difficulties and/or dyslexia?
Good question. The challenge is that these dollars have to be pretty closely tied, specific to students on IEPs, to special education. And so that's where most the focus has been. However, we are putting dollars to our specific to what are called our TIPS, which is our targeted improvement plans, which are required for all of our districts to have. And that is the primary focus of those is on improving reading scores. And so a lot of those are now tied into our MTSS systems as we're building multi-tiered systems of support, which is interventions. And so we are tying dollars of these grants to that. So yes, we have expanded that and will continue to do so. We're working to be able to get a little more flexible with those as much as we possibly can, because we understand that very much the MTSS has been a primary focus for us, even though it's not a special education process, but it is one of our priorities. Yep.
Any other questions? If not, we will thank you, gentlemen, and look forward to an approval tomorrow. And I don't see, well, you're here. Sharon came, so Sharon, come on up. We'll jump back to the previous action item, and this again has to deal with this certification. So would you like to give a brief synopsis?
Yes. Direct certification is a process where students are provided meal benefits, free and reduced meal benefits based on other state agencies' criteria for special programs, assistance programs. So SNAP, which is food stamps, the temporary assistance for needy families, also known as TANF, and then Medicaid. And so what that does is our department interfaces with the Department of Health and Human Services information system, and then we roll out a list of students to each school district that identifies them for free, reduced, or paid, or free or reduced meals. 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, we received a grant from USDA to improve that system, to expand it to incorporate other services that are what we call categorically eligible for free meals, which is the homeless, the migrant, and FDPIR, which is food distribution on Indian reservations. So part of that grant, when we were surveying our work group during our grant improvement process, we found out that they're not using our system as to its full capacity, and didn't have a good understanding. And also there's some new features that we built into the system. So part of the grant application included a trainer. So this contract is for the services of that trainer to develop materials, user manuals for the state user and the school user, also to provide on-site training, build training modules online, and then their travel expenses associated with that training.
Wonderful. Any questions? No, well, thank you, Sharon, and thank you so much for really helping our students that have the food insecurity, and it's so important to have that updated technology. Right now, I would want to let you know our committee did recommend approval of both grants, and we reviewed our program of work, and this concludes the Student and Access Committee report.
Thank you, Molly. Patricia, please report on the policy committee meeting, please.
We had 2 discussion items on the agenda. A 4-year review of State Board Bylaw B18, political activity, use of resources, and accountability and disclosure. The Policy Committee last reviewed this in 2014, and after our 4-year review, the Policy Committee recommends no change to this bylaw at this time. I would remind board members that your accountability and disclosure financial statements are due the 1st of March. Secondly, we discussed a resolution for Secretary of State John Gale, who is retiring, and this is in recognition of his service to education, even though the man wears many other hats in his service to the state. We will be reviewing a draft of a resolution to be presented to Secretary of State John Gale at the March board meeting. If any board member has suggestions regarding Mr. Gale's service to education and would like to have it included in the resolution, please contact Dr. Four. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Patricia. Rachel, please report on the legislative committee meeting, please.
The legislative committee met via phone on Monday and then again today. Tomorrow during our work session retreat, we'll go through and have a greater discussion around the proposed positions for 2018 legislative action. We also did discuss our program of work, and we'll continue to do so, and sketched out kind of several of the goals for this year. And then we did not get to, so I'm going to ask Brian, who just left, or the commissioner, to speak to item 3.4.B, which was a discussion item on the biennium budget impacts for NDE. We ran out of time in our legislative committee. So we'll have that discussion as a full board meeting with the full board. So Commissioner, did you want to speak to that item?
Well,
Or we'll wait and see if we find Brian.
Well, I mean, I'll start this way, and I also believe that within the Finance Committee, there was a chance to discuss certainly the circumstances relative to budget. And the reason that we had it in both committees, just kind of as a background piece, was obviously we're dealing with what happens in the legislature at the same time that we're also dealing with what those impacts might be with the agency. As you know, and I'll probably miscited, so I probably don't have Bryce or Shane somewhere, but I think the proposal from the governor's budget side of the equation is that there would be a 2% reduction in the current fiscal year and a 4% reduction in the fiscal year coming forward. I know the overall impact to us as an agency by the time all this plays out is about $1 million of cuts. So obviously we're trying to address how we will handle that from an agency perspective. Part of why I would like to have a bit of a conversation with you is also in the political perspective. I do have to next Tuesday go appear before the Appropriations Committee and discuss the essentially ramifications of what those cuts would happen to be. We have spent a period of time where the agency's been cut in several ways, and when we've made requests for certain investments in key systems, those haven't always been funded. So it's an important time for us to be able to talk about what we want to accomplish with the strategic plan and how we communicate that to our partners over in the legislature. And trust me, they have tough work ahead of them as well. So it's not as if we don't understand that. We have not gotten into the dynamics of specifics around where or how we will deal with cuts necessarily. I mean, I will try to address some of the general areas, especially with the Appropriations Committee next week. We have been cognizant of that and have several vacancies that we've not filled, rather than start filling vacancies and find ourselves in a position of where we couldn't afford that from that level. So we try to be very cognizant of that. And I know the Finance Committee over the last couple of years has been able to have a little bit deeper discussions about, how to think about managing through those types of scenarios. But I think it's just important that you know and understand that we take that on quite seriously. I will also, just to, maybe it's pouring salt into the wound sometime, but we're also watching the federal side very carefully as well. There have been impacts already to us in decisions at the federal level from a budgetary perspective. In particular, there's been some substantial impacts on how VR programs will be funded going forward and how they will work. Also for us as an agency, and I think it's fair to say that we're really looking at that the legislature continue to provide us a bit more flexibility in how our budget is actually works with them. Among the things that I think, not that we're going to ask for it in this session, but I think probably in the biennium perspective, where VR is treated separately and budgeted for separately underneath the state appropriations system, or the way that appropriations works, and that it doesn't give us the flexibility between programs between the agencies. Also, as we work with the federal government looking at flexibility around how funds might be used and how we would leverage those funds is terribly important. I will say, I think a great source of pride, and I'll talk about it in a little while here, but the integration of how we handle our ESSA plan and integrate and leverage supports for schools in different ways is also quite important to us. So there's a lot of moving parts, but I think it's prudent for us to think about those aspects and the politics that we're in. I suspect this will become a very real conversation for us over the next 2 or 3 months, and certainly will be from an agency perspective. I don't know if Bryce and Shane have words of wisdom to share. I always look to them for some answers. But the reality is it's tough times. I think I walked into Bryce's office a few weeks back, and Bryce looked quite stressed. And I said, Bryce, this is not stress that you have to keep yourself. It's my responsibility to understand those stresses, try to work on it. So I appreciate Bryce and his team for doing that. And I'll say the same relative to with Shane and the budget team and the importance of having thoughtful conversations across the agency. I'll highlight one last thing, and again, kind of gives me a chance to do it now instead of maybe during the strategic planning, but part of your guidance in the strategic plan and your ask was that we had organized the agency to be aligned really with the expectations around the strategic plan. That work is ongoing. I've shared broadly with staff, all staff in meetings about kind of the high levels of that organizational work here over the next month. We will be completing some of those organizational changes based on the capacities that we currently have in the organization, but with the intent of accomplishing the work that's outlined within the strategic plan. I've told folks that, in fact, that work is quite frankly separate from the budget conversation because we think these are the right changes for the organization regardless of the budget. But at the same point in time, we have to also be cognizant that we may have vacancies that are even in our plans that might not be able to be filled given whatever may happen at a legislative level. So yeah, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I don't know that it's surprising news relative to that. But when you start to think of the scope of that impact on us as an agency, and I know Shane is working on some, maybe Shane and Bryce both, and maybe other folks working on some historical data that I'll be using with the Appropriations Committee next week, kind of a 10-year trend of where we've been. The department I know has been cut probably several different times in several different ways. I will say, in last biennium, or in the last biennial budget cycle, at least there was an attempt to protect the agency in many ways. So we thank the legislators that understood those investments that we had to make. But I know it's getting increasingly difficult for them to and for us to be able to find ways that these cuts don't have some impact on work that we want to do. So.
Yes, John?
Thank you. If I could add in regards to dovetail off what the commissioner just said, we were fortunate enough to brief this morning at our accounting and budget meeting, and Bryce and Shane were very kind enough to develop a summary for us. And if I could add also, the department is receiving the 2% cut for the current year and a 4% cut for the next year. The same cuts were made to all aid programs with the exception of VR, vocational rehab, SPED, and TIOSA, and school breakfast. Those programs were not cut because of matching requirements per federal guidelines. With the cuts made over the past 3 years, the department is looking at almost $1.1 million shortfall to deal with. Thank you.
Well, it's a good thing that the Finance Committee had time, because the Legislative Committee did not have time to take on that topic, though it was under our to-do list. So again,
We didn't
tomorrow,
budget time well. Was that?
So tomorrow, we will come forward, the committee will come forward with our recommendations regarding positions on proposed legislation, and have that discussion at that time during the work session / legislative retreat. Any comments from committee members? Maureen?
Since we didn't get to it and we weren't in finance and didn't see the budget, I did realize it was a 2% reduction by the forecasting board and then another 4%. But I just wondered if you're doing your planning, have you talked at all in your committees about how we're going to support post-secondary education? Because I've heard that they're getting cut like 30%. And the community college is not so bad as our university systems, but it's all kids. It's all our kids that are going, to post-secondary college career, and whether it's industry certification or whether it's four-year college. And I just wondered, is there any way we can support post-secondary?
Well, first of all, I don't believe they're getting cut 30%. I believe it's 2% and 4%, just like. But
Hasn't gone down like 30% in the last 10 years?
Oh, that I don't know. I haven't seen that analysis. But what I will say, obviously, in a state where we work closely with our post-secondary partners, I have regular conversations with folks from the university, folks from state colleges. Obviously, I'm on the board of trustees for the state college system, so in my capacity there, we're having very serious conversations about how to manage through this situation, and certainly with community colleges, yet another important partner for us. So, I maybe because I'm optimistic generally about things, but also what I think is special perhaps in education in our work is we think of ways to address challenges like this, and there are great folks that come together. It is hard. It creates some opportunities for us to cross into areas and have conversations about how we can do things more efficiently. Within the agency, I'll tell you, that's what we've been talking about. All of our processes have to be more efficient. All of our interactions with school districts, interactions with others. I know that's the same conversations happening in post-secondary too. Everyone wants to cut as far away from classrooms as possible. Us as an agency, we have to find ways to get more efficient where we can at these moments in time, and I think we've been anticipating trying to get more efficient in those areas. There were certain areas from an investment standpoint that we've continued to make, data systems and others that are important to us too. I just know that the post-secondary partners are doing the same type of work right now.
Thank you.
Lisa?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just reading yesterday about a new coalition that Mike Flood is involved in to support the university system. And so there are some And these are professionals and business people throughout the state that are coming together to support the university system. I thought that was pretty nice idea with all the cuts and everything.
Okay, any other comments from the legislative committee? If not, President Witzel, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you very much, ma'am. Patricia, please report on the Strategic Planning Performance and Improvement Committee meeting.
Excuse me. The committee had one action item on the agenda, the recommendation to designate a priority school. Dr. Friesen presented the commissioner's recommendation, including the process and considerations for designating a priority school per Nebraska's revised statute. And we have asked Dr. Friesen to come forward and present her information.
Thank you. Always like when Dr. Epler says, "and for the record." So, and for the record, I'm Deb Friesen, Deputy Commissioner of School Improvement and Support, and I am here to give the Commissioner's recommendation for the priority school. And as Commissioner Tim says, it is related to Nebraska Revised Statute 79.760.06. Mm-hmm. You can do it. You are very familiar with the statute as it is based on the classification system. And since we are now well into that process of designating or classifying schools, this particular point is about adding another school to that classification. And so the highlight here is to bring on this, excuse me, let me start again with that. The highlight here is about needs improvements. And in the classification system, starting with excellent to great to good to needs improvement schools, the priority school, which we're designating, is supposed to come from the needs improvement category. However, we're determining that in the needs improvement category, the school that would be designated doesn't have to be what would be considered the lowest of those schools. As a matter of fact, it's not even about being the lowest in the needs improvement category. It's about a school that we believe, with assistance, can improve. And so we've looked at all the factors considering identifying that school. We've talked with NDE staff, we looked at demographics, we looked at changes in leadership, trend data, and we looked at the EBA, to name a few of the things. The selection process is in phases. It starts again with the identification of the needs improvement schools using the raw classification and EBA designation. But as you can recall, we've already designated 3 schools. We looked at a school from the urban metro classification, and 36% of our needs improvement schools are from that classification. We looked at a school and identified one from the Native American, and 13% of our needs improvement schools are from that classification. And 36% of our needs improvement schools are from the small community classification. The one category that we haven't designated a school from yet is the demographically shifting community, and 15% of our needs improvement schools are there. But if you look at Nebraska as a whole, many of our schools overall are demographically shifting and transitioning at that time. And so our thought was to pull a school from that area, because this is all about building our capacity to assist all of our schools throughout Nebraska. Our urban schools, our Native American schools, our small community schools, as well as our demographically shifting schools. In the third phase, we brought together the staff of accountability, assessment, data research and evaluation, and teaching and learning, and they narrowed the eligible needs improvement schools, elementary, middle, and high school, to 7 in particular. Accreditation in school improvement, federal programs, school finance, and special education really bore down and looked at available data so that we only weren't looking at this from a qualitative way, but we also were looking at this from a very quantitative way, so that overall we would have measurements to be able to determine when we really have improvement. Some of those who were involved are some of those who hadn't been involved in the process early on. And so at this particular point, just about every department in NDE was involved. Next one. The school that we are recommending, or that the commissioner is recommending, is Schuyler Central High School in Schuyler. Their superintendent is Dr. Dan Hazing. Mr. Stephen Grammer is their principal, and this is a Class B school at this time with an enrollment of 575 students. The factors and the indicators that went into this decision. The EBA itself, evidence-based analysis. This survey looks at the policies, the practices, and the procedures related to our 6 AQuest tenets. And Schuyler was one of the schools in the needs improvement category, at really the school that had the most requests in the needs improvement schools for assistance. In terms of status, Schuyler status has decreased each year since the initial 2015 classification. In terms of growth, growth is not one of the variables considered or the indicators considered at the high school level. Improvement, over the years, their improvement score has decreased, as well as the number of students who have been proficient has not increased. And graduation rate, when you're looking at the 4-year cohort graduation rate, in 2015, 82.44, and yes, it did increase to 91.44 for 2016, but it declined in 2017 to 82.73. In my discussion with Schuyler, they would say if you looked at the 5-6 year graduation rate, it has gone up, but our measurement right at this time is the 4-year graduation rate. Some other factors. 3 years ago, Schuyler received a school improvement grant which called for the principal to be replaced. Mr. Grammer had been in the district, but then he was moved to Schuyler to become the principal there. The average years of teaching experience at Schuyler is 12.38 years compared to the district average of 14.09 years. Schuyler is fortunate that they have had a Grow Your Own Teacher program, and just because of such, I would imagine that their years of experience is going to decline this year because they're bringing in 2 of their own grown teachers to start in the 2018 school year. But here's some challenges for Schuyler. Their enrollment, yes, is 575, but they represent 3 ethnic groups: Hispanic 87%, Caucasian 10%, African American / African 3%. But if you were to go back and look at Schuyler probably a decade ago or more, they were at one point 100% Caucasian, and because of Gale and the influx of that industry into that community, they right now are at 87%, and I would imagine over time that's going to continue to increase. And so that's how they fall into the demographically shifting or transitioning category, because that is a huge change for Schuyler, a huge change for its community. And in and of itself, it brings on some issues that Schuyler needs to deal with as a community as well as a school when it comes to student achievement. Schuyler has a relatively, yes, high EL population, approximately 132 or 25% of their high school enrollment. 15 different world languages are in the building, along with 12 different countries represented there. So you look at their ELPA 21 scores for 2015 and 16 with that population of students, and 0 students have been proficient on the ELPA 21. And that certainly is of concern. While it might be understandable that some students are coming in perhaps with no English experience because maybe they're stepping into the school in their junior year, senior year, they're stepping into the school in the freshman year, and perhaps come from no language no English language, still, it is certainly our goal and expectation that our students would be successful, and right now we have no students proficient in the ELPA 21 at Schuyler. Chronic absenteeism rate is 16.06, which means that 18 or more absences, that we have 16.6% of the students who have 18 or more absences. That's less than the state average for the needs improvement high school category, which I think is about 21% or so, but that's still alarming to us. Schuyler has decreased in their special education numbers and the number of students that are receiving special education service, but there still is a concern that perhaps there's some under-identification when it comes to special education. They received Title III dollars, or did in 2016-17, but all the allocated dollars were not utilized for professional development. And indeed, some special arrangements had to be made in the 2017-18 year that they could receive funding again. At the same time, Schuyler requested funding in their EBA. And Schuyler is very similar to other demographically shifting communities. And so when we find ourselves successful in being able to help them and make a difference for their community of students, then we feel that we will be able to build our capacity to be able to assist other communities like Lexington, Madison, Wakefield, and others. Dr. Dan Hazing. He's in his 5th year at Schuyler. He's a superintendent. He comes from Alliance, and he believes he's brought some positive energy to the school and the school community. He believes he's put some things in place there that really make a difference. Yes, he's a veteran superintendent. Not that by any means the enthusiasm of the superintendent or the willingness is how we make a decision or a recommendation to put a school in priority status. But in this case, Schuyler, in my discussions with them, would be certainly excited if you would accept that recommendation. They think, or I guess I should say, their whole goal in my discussion with them is to do whatever it takes to have their students be successful. Yet, they can still also have a discussion that they know that there are probably some other things related to culture, related to mindset, that they certainly could work on if their students are all to achieve there. And so the recommendation of the commissioner is for Schuyler High School to be your next priority school, if you would.
The committee had the opportunity this morning to ask questions of Dr. Friesen after she gave this presentation, and I know not everyone was there, so are there other board members that have questions of Dr. Friesen on this recommendation? John?
Doctor, one quick question. I was surprised to see the Title III money, none was spent for professional development. Is there a reason for that?
I asked that specific question of Schuyler, of Dr. Hazing. When I asked him, he had an answer that started with the ESU and their relationship with the ESU.
Fair enough.
Where the money went, where the money didn't go. When I speak with our knowledgeable also NDE staff, they say, oh, no, the money went to Schuyler. And so right there, just right there, implies some things that we could help get straightened out in terms of how the money could spend, where the money's going, and how best to use it for the services of the students.
Well, curious minds need to know, where did it go?
Yes, curious minds will find out.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Maureen?
I don't have a question, but I just want to thank you for this in-depth information that you have provided. It certainly gives me pause for discussion when my constituents ask me why Schuyler or whatever, but thank you for the presentation. Excellent.
Certainly.
Patrick?
Just one question, I guess. Was there any explanation for that aberration of that 91% graduation rate in that 1 year? I mean, to go up 10 and then drop 10, that's an aberration. There should have been some reason for that, it would seem to me.
No. That's my easiest response, Pat, because I don't know specifically why we didn't get into that, because as I talk about the graduation rate with Dr. Hazing and talk about any kind of decline, he focuses on the 5-6-year graduation rate, and that it's higher than even the 4-year graduation
Yeah,
rate. And
yeah.
so what I would hope is that at some particular point, we would be working toward 100% regardless.
Okay. And then I have a question, I guess, for the commissioner, and it's not necessarily relative to Schuyler, but what kind of metrics will we continue to receive on Druid Hill to show that progress didn't just get made over a year, but continues to get made?
Yeah, and first of all, I think when in the PowerPoint you saw the various elements that essentially go into the classification system, right? That we'll continue to track those for all schools. We do have we'll call it a unique opportunity for us to be able to take what we're doing with ESSA and also what we're doing with priority schools. So our continued work with Druid Hill as well as Omaha Public Schools on looking at needs improvement. Their needs improvement schools will continue and tracking that. I do think the reality for us looking at schools that exit, and we actually have to write and include that exit process within ESSA. We're really monitoring that and learning probably from the opportunity to have Druid Hill exit and bring another priority school on, because as we monitor there, we get a chance to really continue to work with a school district and continue to learn and watch and ensure that progress is taking place. Just like with Schuyler is a new selection, and also just like our other Loop County and Santee, as we anticipate the types of changes, we want to make sure, just like in our own state board strategic plan, if we do X, we hope that we would see Y, if that's the right analogy. And our X is a strategy about the type of intervention that we have, and then we'd like to see improvement in test results and other results as well. Chronic absenteeism should go down, graduation rate should go up, all of those things should come together. And that's what we're watching also for in Druid Hill. We know that we saw improvements in their scores in addition to the work that took place. We'll continue to monitor that and really want to have a system that we can monitor all schools on those results in part of our reporting generally.
And then with Schuyler, do we anticipate that we'll be contracting with a third party again as we have in the past to work with us on that school?
Yeah, it'll probably start to take a little different shape given we also have to be efficient in how our processes are going to work. We've learned a lot in the first starting point. I think we typically, and maybe Dr. Freising can probably answer this better than I, but typically go in with a diagnostic review and build a plan with the school district. We'll do that together and bring that back to the state board by August. That plan will include how we're gonna move about the investments out of the priority school resources. Those, by the way, those resources are getting cut as well as part of the budget process, so we're having to watch that fairly closely. And I don't know.
Absolutely. Schuyler is involved in some other initiatives and some other contractual arrangements. They are Discovery Education School, they are Mazzano School, they are an APL school. And so we'll have to see through the diagnostic review just exactly where we would fit in to help them maneuver all those programs. They've already started. One of the big things for us is always instruction, but they've already started down a path with that. And so we'll have to see how what we know about sound instruction informs their process and work with some things like that. Another point, if you would allow, that I really wanted to make that I left out was that Principal Grammer attended an immigration migrant conference 2 years ago in Los Angeles. And there were many different breakout sessions, but one in particular that really caught his attention. The subject of the breakout was port of entry and how to assist these demographically shifting or transitioning communities. Principal Grammer was caught off guard when Schuyler, Nebraska, was introduced as the 7th largest port of entry in the nation per population. Cities before Schuyler were Los Angeles, New York, Phoenix, El Dorado, Texas, San Diego, and Schuyler. I think that's a big point. Little Schuyler, Nebraska.
Thank you so much. I just really want to applaud Nebraska Department of Education and the State Board of Education for taking this huge priority of demographically shifting schools. And when Dr. Friesen pointed out that last statistic she stated, I went to do a little research, and it said in fiscal 2016, Nebraska resettled the most refugees per 100,000 residents, the most. And that's amazing. We're ranked 76 in resettlement, but we had the most refugees per 100,000 residents. So it's a huge issue, and also we're hard financial times. But there's a lot of hope and opportunity here too as well. And my earlier question about post-secondary education, I think it's going to be really important we try to get more faces that look like the population in these demographically shifting schools, because that will help build a rapport, not necessarily that they're the same race, but they understand at least their cultures and respect them, and that'll help engage the students. Thank you.
Yes. Back several months ago, I reported that I had traveled to Schuyler. Dr. Hissing had invited me there to see his community project that he had built to bring the existing community together with the immigrant population. Yes. And so I spent an evening in the gymnasium and the cafeteria with this community, and he's really built a huge rapport with his community, all of the community, enough to build a huge sports center.
Yes.
And one of the things that I thought was most interesting about that, it was open to the public, and he had established a group of people that signed in, mostly older people signed in, found a partner, and walked with that student 3 times a week to get to know them. Because when you have a shifting community, there's a lot of fear in that, and he was trying to erase some of that. And then now they're presently working on a brand new theater. So he has a lot of power, and I think when you see those words that he considers it an honor that this, that the state is wanting to come in and help, I think you made a great decision, and thank you also as well for all your work.
He has really pushed the arts. He's pushed parent involvement. He's thought of some very different kind of ways in terms of he offers dual enrollment, and he has his families pay for it, but the way they pay for it is their engagement in the building, and that has increased his parent involvement in the building. And so he looks at this priority status, if they get it, as one more way to think of some ideas and put into place some practices that could make a difference. And if they make a difference there, they can make a difference in all of our other demographically shifting environments.
A school could look at it quite differently, but to see how it's on paper, how he sees it, and how their community sees it is really wonderful.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. After hearing all of this positive support, we will be recommending that Schuyler Central High School be designated as a priority school tomorrow. Our next agenda item was a discussion item on the ESSA plan resubmission and alignment with our strategic plan in AQuest, and the commissioner shared information about the discussion with the U.S. Department of Education on the approval of Nebraska's ESSA plan, and offered some input on addressing significant points that they wanted feedback on. And he's also got some other information about where we're moving forward with the strategic plan, so.
To raise my chair, though. I was fell short there for a second. Yeah, thanks, Pat. I'm going to go through a few of these slides. I actually have quite a few slides. I probably will try to be a little selective, just given John's pointing at his watch or anything. So actually, I do want to talk you through the important conversations that we are having regarding certainly where we're at with ESSA, and a little bit around certainly timelines and how this ties together with strategic planning. So it'll give you a flavor for some of that work and how that ties together, and including even, I think, with Dr. Friesen's presentation on priority school. Remember, the work around ESSA is the ability for us to identify and support schools that need that additional support to improve. That's what we do this work for, and so I'm actually very excited to be able to take the examples that we've built with priority schools and be able to scale up, build the capacity based on the roles that we said we would be able to build as part of the strategic plan, that we step in as change agents on occasion when that seems necessary, that we support schools in a lot of different ways. And so I'm actually very excited about that work, but there is some work to do, obviously. And the first work as far as getting ESSA going is I want to give you this update. You know that back in late December, and I don't remember the exact date, the U.S. Department of Ed gave us our first feedback on the plan that we submitted. We responded to that and resubmitted the plan on January 19th, which I think, if I remember right, was the last day the federal government was open before its micro shutdown, I'll call it. It wasn't too long, but we submitted that plan on that date. Actually, just a week later, they got back to us with some written comments. I believe they called Diane Steamer and then and got us some written comments back, and we followed up with a phone call just on Monday, right? So the time frame for this has been relatively quick. I will tell you the vast majority of the comments were things that I'll say minor, but minor as far as our ability to respond to them, some technical clarifications, some maybe an inconsistency or something within the language that they saw. We were able to address many of those on the phone, and we'll be able to provide them the written updates on those points relatively easily. There are what I'll call 3 significant points that I want to highlight to you that have an impact on how we think about the system and how we implement the system. So I'm going to go through those 3. The first significant point, and these are significant in a lot of different ways, and if you have questions as I go through each of these points, maybe it'd be appropriate to take your questions on each point. The first significant point, that the use of EBA regarding selection of comprehensive and targeted support is a concern to them because we are not able to disaggregate data on the EBA by subgroup in a school or in a district. And that is a concern for them. And I actually understand that concern better now after our conversation with them on Monday about what the intention as they view it within the ESSA law. And so we had a very good dialogue with them about what that meant. And so what they said is all of the data that you would use to identify comprehensive support schools or targeted support schools has to be, you must use data that can be disaggregated by that. We thought, and part of it is when I look statewide, we can actually see populations of students based on the schools that they're in. Doesn't give us a perfect disaggregation of data down to the student level, but we can see trends with EBA that I think are important. But they made very good points about why that clarity was important for the ESSA law. And so we actually, in that moment in time, and I'd give some credit to Jeremy Henniger right in the moment, because I just remember maybe he lit up and said, why wouldn't we just do it this way? And so what the proposal and discussion was at that moment in time, and what I believe our team is working on, but I want you to know this because this is a slight difference in where we've been, but we would actually address this by using raw classification, which would have only elements that are able to be disaggregated by subgroup population, and I think that actually they felt very good about that, at least on the phone in our quick conversation around those points. But it also allows us to still apply the EBA in our processes within the state. And they use the example of, hey, look, there are other states doing that. And for example, Massachusetts was another state doing that. And I was actually very pleased. I take that as a compliment when I compare Nebraska to other states. I'm going to pick a place like Massachusetts to compare ourselves to, because they went from a system that struggled, it still has struggles if you talk to folks there, but struggled But they got together with their governor, their legislature, their Department of Education, and all of their players and said, hey, look, we're going this direction. And they stuck with that for a long time. And that's why they've raised scores. That's why they've been impressive, I think, in their abilities to move that. And so I think, well, if we're going to model places that are doing something from a policy perspective, I think that makes sense. So I pause there. Here's what's different for us, right? We were anticipating in the steps in order of selecting schools for comprehensive support. Originally, we would have written it that the EBA would have been used as part of that process. In this case, we'd use it kind of in a step after that process of identification for comprehensive support. Here's what it still allows us to do, which I'm also pleased about, that selection of priority schools still would allow us to be able to do that. So Nebraska having kind of its own approach is actually powerful, I think, in the balancing act with ESSA. So, any questions on that particular point? If not, did somebody have one? All right, I'll move forward. I was going to move forward quicker, but I don't want to. I want to give you. All right. So the second significant point is, I think, one worthy of some discussion and conversation with you around annual identification and classification. So the issue that the U.S. Department of Education provided in feedback indicates that identification and eligibility for comprehensive and targeted support is necessary on an annual basis. So that they are saying that must be done in that fashion. And here's an approach that we could use, and I want to have a little dialogue with you on this, because one approach we could use is that, hey, look, yes, certainly we could run raw classification on an annual basis and do our state classification in a different cycle, or we could start to talk about, do we want annual classification? And I think we certainly have heard from our legislative partners on a couple different fronts about their feelings around annual classification. I will tell you, and I had to kind of review the history in my own mind relative to where we've been in the build out of this particular system. We didn't want classification just to be about naming schools, right? That we wanted to be integrated into what we're doing in accreditation and in so many other ways. But I think we can find that happy medium in this process. In part because we're asking for some changes, I think, even in the legislative session right now that would actually help us integrate that regarding our bill that includes the identification of more than 3 priority schools. There's some, and the time frame of those things that could tie together. Also the fact that we have opportunities to and need to shape Rule 10 and accreditation processes to align with what we've done here. But I am curious what your thoughts are on annual identification and classification, and where do you feel that would where we need to go? So.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Just one other item, and that's back to LB 1110 that was introduced by Senator Vargas, and that bill does require annual reporting. So again, tomorrow when we talk about it, we'll be recommending support for that particular bill, and it aligns with, as the Commissioner just shared, this particular change in moving forward with a process of annual identification and classification aligns with that particular bill also.
Anyone else have any questions on significant point 2?
I'll move on to significant point 3, and this one's a slightly more complex, but I'll see if I can manage to explain it well enough anyway. First of all, as we had written into the plan, one of the requirements underneath ESSA that you had to include measures and metrics around English learners. Obviously, we're in a process of just implementing the new ELPA 21. Ideally, where we'd be is that we would have 3 years worth of data to set all the goals, and we've written several different approaches to that within the plan, but really said, hey, look, in order to do this well, we're going to have to delay that until later this spring. They said, no, you can't delay that part of the plan until later this spring. Instead, what we talked with them about, and they would be all right with it, is for us to project what we believe data might look like, have to simulate, I think I put in there, data in order to understand how we would implement and use the ELPA 21 within our accountability system. Again, our team's working on what that would look like and how we would accomplish that, and certainly working with our assessment consultants and others to ensure that there'd be an approach to that. So we are working on that. I think anyway, I anticipate that we would be able to write something to the satisfaction on this side of the plan. The other thing that they said they would welcome, or at least allow us to be able to include in the plan, is to say, hey, look, if you get to this point, we approve this plan, and if you need to make an amendment at a later time based on a need or a necessary change in calculation, we'd be able to move forward and do that. Because they know other states are also facing that type of challenge, trying to implement new systems, and moving forward on those fronts is really quite important. So I will add that maybe to a lesser extent, but the same type of issue exists for us relative to math, science, and English language arts as we change standards, because we only have so many years of data. We presented it with past years of data, and we'll actually have to come back, and because we set different types of cut scores, we moved the direction. We adopted ACT, which I've got another slide on that point that I want to point out. But the reality is, taking all that together, we're really working with our assessment and our assessment team and assessment consultants and others to ensure that we can write something that would be appropriate and meets the requirements that exist underneath the law. Talked you out of questions on that one. Yeah, thanks. Certainly our ESSA plan next steps, we plan to submit as quickly as possible. The 120-day clock that is applied really to the U.S. Department of Education is ticking also on them. We hope to turn that around, so the 120-day clock for our resubmittal would essentially be February 9th, and just because I love irony, and that'd be the next possible shutdown of the federal government. So I don't know if we're causing that problem, but if so, we'll try to get it in sooner, I guess. So certainly our attention is turning to how we get beyond the plan writing stage and approval stage and onto implementation. And I didn't name all the folks, and I know I missed some folks, but certainly Ryan has been instrumental in our efforts to coordinate and get the plan written. Lane Carr has been instrumental. Diane Steamers provide leadership, and actually many others. So I know I'm not going to get everyone named right there, but it's a very substantial effort, and but I feel very good because we have our strategic plan, and our strategic plan has guided our work. Our work on AQuest has guided our work, and I think that's a really good place for us to be in as a state. So.
I was just curious. I know one of your emails on your commissioner updates, you had commented that they were giving you a little bit question why our federal plan and our state plan were so similar. And to us, it made sense to be in alignment because that way we're not double reporting. So I was just curious, are other states following your lead?
I think other states are trying to do similar things in the sense of trying to have a singular plan. I think there are a few that are going to the kind of the effort. I don't know how many other states have something like what we have with AQuest relative to also the identification of priority schools in that same fashion. I will tell you, I mean, again, I'll pick on Massachusetts for a moment. Massachusetts has something similar where they identify schools that go into receivership. That's a little further step than what we use for priority school, but it's actually an important step, and something that I think we have within our abilities, or at least in conversations of maybe not quite exactly that model, but some model that would be similar, because there are moments in time, and I want to be thoughtful about this even as we go into the work with Schuyler, the importance of how boards function, the board's abilities to actually interject and work on that. I mean, I'm very, very, very proud of our interactions in both Santee and Loup County, where we specifically wrote plans for their boards. I think that's perhaps it was an accidental good idea, but it was a good idea nonetheless. We kind of stumbled into it, and I will tell you, in that case, we actually more stumbled into it with Luke County, but I don't know where I'd be if I didn't have it also for Santee. And I just think it's an advantage to have plans that think to the governance level. I think, again, what you've done on a strategic plan makes us think about governance level in a different way when we're working with schools. We want the same thing to really be part of that process, even when we work in schools from an ESSA perspective. It really pains me, by the way, and even on the conversation around Schuyler, when schools have received SIG grants and you don't see the type of turnaround that you would have hoped for. We're trying to build a process that ensures that those funds are getting the type of turnaround that we hope for. The SIG grants, I think, across the country, and not unique to Nebraska, I think there was some question of how that worked. And the way that process worked was you just simply turned over money to the school, and they said, well, we agreed to fire the principal, and then hopefully it all gets better, right? That doesn't work. And doesn't work in Nebraska, hasn't worked in a lot of places. Santee is a former SIG grant recipient, as I recall, but we didn't have the tool set that we now have, like we've defined with priority schools. So I think I don't know how many other states are doing that or how exactly that might look, but for us, it just feels right. It feels like the way we ought to do it, and it puts us in a position to be both more authoritative and also more supportive. And I think Dr. Friesen said something about help versus serve. I think that's a great part of the language that we begin to learn. We are serving places in some, it's sometimes they don't want to be served right away, but we are serving them anyway. So, but it is what we're there for. So, I'll highlight this just as kind of an additional point because it's substantial, and Dr. Foy had shared earlier this week that we've had a reach out on from the U.S. Department of Ed, so a separate part of the U.S. Department of Ed that will be going through peer review with our ACT. A highlight, I guess, is that not a single other state has been approved when they just have ACT by itself. They normally have had wraparound type of assessment or something else that goes with that. I don't know. We submitted a slightly different approach to it than other states had done in the past. I don't know if this administration or under the current administration, if they've reviewed one of these before. So we'll find out next week a little bit more, but it obviously has significant impact on how we're thinking about using high school data and using ACT relative to that work, and I guess we're just going to find out. I got to give you a cliffhanger of some sort. I don't know. I guess that's it. So, I'm going to breeze through a few more points, if you'll permit me. John, if you shut me off at 3:30, I'm good with you. So about another 10 minutes, maybe. So the team is working on detailed timelines. I don't really intend that you can read this, but this is an example of the timelines in different areas. This one has AQuest updates, ESSA implementation, Rule 10 alignment, the development of our school improvement processes, and the kind of the redesign of our school improvement processes are all kind of contained in there. We can get very, very deep into the set of timelines and work across the agency, and actually are. So part of what in our investments within the agency and how we think about doing work, we've created a project management office, and for instance, this is something Lane Carr created, and working with Diane, thinking through the timelines that we have to address. I wanted to hit a few. I have to think simpler, spring, summer, fall sometimes, and I've got a few of the things that we have. We actually had some conversations in the committee that this is not updated on, so this might not be exactly right based on our conversations in committee, but obviously here over the next couple months we have this transition from plan approval to plan implementation with ESSA. We're doing our work with our data elements and reviewing that, and I think we had a conversation in the committee of doing some of that review in including the committee and probably the board, maybe even other conversations about if we're gonna include other new elements or do any redesign work, what that would look like. Certainly, it's time to start on Rule 10 and our school improvement. I put frameworks there. Frameworks is our Nebraska-based approach for school improvement. Schools can also choose to use an advanced ed approach, but it's really time that we have an AQuest-based school improvement and accreditation framework. And so that work is beginning and will have impact on what Rule 10 looks like going forward. Obviously, our priority school work is, and I didn't get that one correct, that should be onboarding, one word, is beginning right now. And then our organization, and I mentioned that before, that our organizational work within the agency is taking place. I really expect to be able to announce publicly at the March meeting the changes. We're doing some of that work right now. And then obviously assessment implementation, in addition to the ACT piece, that we have a new assessment vendor, and there's, I guess in teaching and learning, we had a bit of that conversation of doing an update even in that committee. So there's a lot of moving parts there. April, May, and June, you can expect Rule 10 to begin to be a real conversation for us at the board level with, and we're pushing it, by the way, but I'd really like to be able to have a Rule 10 in front of the board for approval after a hearing in June, right? So that work is moving quickly. That's very important work because that tells schools what our expectations are. Even getting it approved then is not really going to probably have much impact in the year right after that, or the next school year, but it'd be a full year out. But the sooner we get that done, the more we can begin working with schools. We have our kind of our ongoing work with AQuest and data, and a lot of moving parts on thinking through the systems that are going to make a difference to schools. And we have our data conference, our AQuest data conference in April, where we get to probably talk and share with schools about how that data is being used. It's really time to begin conversations about Rule 84. I really think the logical step is that Rule 84 kind of follows Rule 10, but pretty closely behind, because we want those things aligned in the same type of improvement process around AQuest. And then certainly at the committee level, we'll be doing strategic plan reviews, but also probably bringing elements of the strategic plan to other committees and also to the full board as appropriate. We did talk third-party review process as well, and the committee asked me to bring back some recommendations, I think, to keep that work going. July and August, we'll have assessment standard setting, and I want to highlight this. This is also very important work. The Teaching and Learning Committee was part of approving or recommending the standards to the board when we set ELA standards. Well, we have math, certainly new standards in math, and an ability to set those, I'll call it cut scores. I'm using standard setting, and I mean it in a different light than standards, so sorry about that. But given that we also have a new vendor for 3 through 8, I think we're going to have to really be kind of on our game to get all these things accomplished. Also in that time frame, once we're able to finalize assessment data and reporting, modeling, raw classification, and the AQuest system, all of that in a time frame, finalizing our priority school plan. So by August, I would anticipate that plan would be in front of the board. And Rule 10 and Rule 84, I'm hoping are one's done and the others, in process by then. September and October, important in the sense that the federal fiscal year ends on September 30th, starts on October 1st. So that transition, so really next fiscal year is when the ESSA implementation is taking place. So that's the first year of implementation underneath ESSA law for Nebraska. And then certainly we're hoping that our classification underneath AQuest and all the data and the reporting are in a position that we can get at least by November. I would love to be able to keep trying to move that time frame up, which is going to take some work, and we're not going to accomplish that in 1 year, but I'd love to see it in October again, at least if we could get that far in the future. So, and then finally, Rule 84, I'm hoping that we'd at least be in a position to have a hearing on Rule 84 by mid-October. Naturally, in November and December, we have the after A-class classification. That's actually puts us in the position to identify kind comprehensive and targeted support schools. And I'll back up, actually, Diane reminded me, this first year we just identified comprehensive support. Targeted support's actually delayed a year based on the law. But the comprehensive support are the schools that we probably most intensively work in, look something like the priority school process, if that helps. And then obviously, and I think all of your committees heard different elements of work, including how we're thinking about handling rules committee by committee, how we're thinking about the alignment of a lot of different activities certainly at the policy and board level, but also at the agency level that come together in this next year. So a lot going, and I hope you can stick with me.
Molly, just on that last slide, when it says there eligibility for comprehensive and targeted support, will that involve more fiscal support for our targeted schools? I mean, is that going to take the place of the SIG grant? So could we use that with our, no?
No, in fact, the design of this within our S plan, we have the vast majority of funding available will be underneath comprehensive support, targeted support. Well, I'm saying that, and we actually have some decisions to make along the way, but targeted support is really about how schools are doing relative to subgroup populations. It might be sometimes that the same schools are identified, right? I mean, but there might be some schools that we would otherwise not be looking at. That maybe it's, I mean, it could be like in a just beginning demographically shifting community where you wouldn't see subgroup populations pop up. In Nebraska, I think you'll see a special presentation tomorrow talking about this type of instance, right? That Nebraska has been majority white. Yeah. We can kind of look at the historical fairly high achievement when you look at statewide data, but once you start to disaggregate that data and look at performance, that's the intention of the targeted support, is to find those places that maybe otherwise look pretty good, but they aren't doing very well by their racial, ethnic minorities, special ed population, poverty population, on and on and on. And so it's to catch those places that maybe aren't getting caught in another, and I don't, catch sounds like the wrong word, but to identify those places that aren't otherwise maybe showing up in the system, or easily identified without looking at subgroup population, which is why they want the ability to disaggregate that data. And I actually think that's a strong reason. So
in other words, we're not going to have the super group. You'll have to know.
Well, we can still use that within our calculations. We have the non-proficient as part of that, but we also have to use all the other data, which we were planning to do anyway. This is just a good way to make sure it's...
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Lisa, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Commissioner, at the beginning of your talk, you talked about, we'd have a discussion about whether we would do annual identification and classification for annual EBA. You have 1110, Senator Vargas's bill passes, then we have to go with annual classification and identification, is that correct?
Do you want?
Well, I'll take it on one way. I know the legislative committee had a very good
about it.
conversation on this very front, and I shared that, I think our reality is that the possibility is, hey, look, we're probably in a position where that I don't necessarily need the statute to change. I think we're going to move towards annual if that's your decision. And I would actually, that would be my recommendation right now, because I don't see a benefit to us not applying the EBA also on an annual basis, but it wouldn't be exactly the same way. But so Senator Vargas's bill, I don't know would have any dramatic impact on that for us one way or the other. But
I think that's our discussion. The legislative committee has been, how do we continue to build a proactive process? Right. And clearly there have been a lot of voices across the state who've said they want an annual reporting process in some capacity, annual classification process, as well as ESSA really is requiring that. So I think from the perspective of the legislative committee and what's been brought forward for the strategic planning, maybe it's time that we say we need to move to an annual process. And now, how do we make sure we're comfortable with what that looks like? That's some of the work that still has to be done. But in essence, whether Senator Vargas' bill goes forward or not, we're moving in that direction, and I think that's gonna be the recommendation going forward, that we move in that direction. And I think that's where, how do we continue to build a process of being proactive when we get input and hear from others, and hear the rationale as to why something is important? How do we take a look at that and consider that?
So, can I ask a follow-up question? How will that,
Microphone.
Oops.
Mike?
Microphone.
Oh.
Well, no, of course not. How will that affect each school's, if we do an annual classification identification and an annual EBA, how will that affect the reporting process, or if at all?
We're doing EBA annually now, so it was a matter of how often we respun the data for the classification system, right? So it's not, from a data collection standpoint, very little impact for us. It's really about how we think about that process. I will tell you, the reason that we were thinking in 3-year cycles was this notion of how we tie it into the accreditation system. We were thinking about, in order for us to check on the data around the EBA, I mean, it's evidence-based analysis. We wanted to see evidence too. We wanted to be able to go, especially with schools that were in needs improvement, to say, hey, look, you said you needed this, or not doing this. Can we demonstrate to you how you might have models that you could actually do process work at a school level that would make a difference in ultimately in your outcomes? I think we can accomplish that regardless of the 3-year cycle. I just think we might do it slightly differently. We have a 5-year cycle for the accreditation of school districts. Maybe we look at a cycle that looks different for those schools. Certainly we are looking at we have a 5-year cycle, for instance, with priority schools. We made the recommendation that ought to go to 3-year. Maybe there's some other things we could do with a 3-year cycle for schools that are otherwise struggling, and maybe we pay our time and attention in those places. And those places that are otherwise not struggling, maybe we look at a 6-year cycle. I don't know. There's some opportunities for us to discuss that. And it's really about that resource alignment and system alignment, I guess, and that's my favorite thing to say. So, but it is about making sure all those pieces come together with the benefit of kind of some data and information we otherwise wouldn't have.
Thank you.
Well, there you have our plan of work for the coming year. And so you will hear from us on a regular basis, as well as hopefully we will have these kinds of discussions on a regular basis as well. So that concludes my report.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you very much. I'll report on the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. We just reviewed the deficit budget bill, LB 944, with all interested parties, but if I could, I want to thank Shane and Bryce for supplying me a good briefing in regards to our meeting this morning. In summary, the Budget and Finance Committee reviewed the quarterly budget report as of December 31. We highlighted the operations totals for the education administration portion of the budget, which had spent about 44% of the budget at the halfway of the year. The education aid has only spent 35% of its budget, but that amount will catch up quickly due to TIOSA and SPED payments made during the next 6 months. Quick update in regards to committee program work. The committee noted that budgeting would continue to be a big part of the work of the Budget and Finance Committee, especially as we put together biennial budget requests this year. In addition to budgeting, the committee will also be reviewing audits and could review several rules around finance. And lastly, we reviewed Board Policy P5 on contracts, grants, and purchases was reviewed, and it was discussed that due to the policy change last fall that SPED grants would be coming to the board for their approval this month for the first time. That concludes my briefing. Any questions? No questions? Thank you very much. At this time, we'll move into board reports, dates, and discussion items.
Do you want to take a break?
We can. Let's take a 5-minute break.
I saw a couple people nodding.
Good idea. 5 minutes. Thank you.
Sped grants coming to board.
At this time, we'll commence with our agenda again, where we left off, and that'll be reports, dates, and discussion items. We'll first start with meeting participate in joint meetings with policy partners. We will now have an opportunity for board members to provide a brief report on recent meetings they have had since the January board meeting. If you have nothing to report, feel free to pass. This month, I would like to discuss the following events as a whole group. Student Mobility Workshop, January 12, Lincoln, Nebraska. We had myself, Patrick, Patsy, and Lisa. And since Patsy was literally the lead who made all this happen for us, would you like to begin, Patsy?
Sure, I would. Okay, I brought these for those of you who aren't able to attend.
Microphone, please.
I think they're particularly, whoops, sorry, thank you. I brought these because I thought they might help you see how we spent the day. Dr. Jane Stavum is the head of the program that was presented that day, and it included teachers across the state. Scottsbluff was there virtually, and the place was packed. And with teachers, and they allowed us to move from table to table, so I could sit with some District 1 people, but I could also sit with people that were from different areas of the state as well and see what kind of challenges they're facing as far as mobility. And what the day consisted of was identifying and defining what mobility meant, and there's some really stereotypical ideas about what mobility means. And most of us think that it is only poor kids, only moving for dire reasons, and Jane Stavum was quick to tell us that it was also kids who were moving because their parents were in the military, or because their parents had a new job and they had to go to that. And so, and that each one of these moves was equally as difficult for the kids that were involved. And to help us all be aware of what happens to children when they're moved. Because the one common denominator is that they don't have any control of it. They're being moved from one place to the next, no matter what the reason is. That's not their choice. And so Dr. Stavum believes that being prepared in every way as a school system can really protect these kids. They're, Lisa, they're ACEs kids too. It's really, really a high stressor to them, and especially if they're moving a lot. And so the schools went through a step-by-step program with her, and then after they had defined it for their school, identified it in their school, then they started looking at what is their plan? What is the plan that they have established in their school? And I think most of them found out that they had bits and pieces of plans for how you handle that move for an incoming student, and interestingly enough, for an outcoming student. And the plans were for the students, the teachers, the administrators, the secretaries, people that were keeping statistical information for them. And by the end of the day, when they left, they had a plan for their school system, albeit not complete, but a plan. And it was so interesting to see them work, and how hard they worked, and how much they cared about it. And they didn't want anybody to mess up the focus that they had as they were working on this, because they were under the pressure to get something done and bring it back to their school system. Because I think her whole book and her whole attitude in the presentation was that this is really important to the survival of so many kids, because she talked about the consequences of moving often and not having a plan. They could be really bad for kids, really dire: academic failure, suicide, dropping out of school. And if you have a plan, it can make it a lot easier on kids, and perhaps prevent some of those horrible things. Yeah.
Lisa, Patrick, would you like to comment on the?
Go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, I guess my mic is on.
Mine is.
Just a couple of things. One of the ideas that I thought was excellent at one of the tables that I sat at was lunch bunch, where you had your high mobility kids eat with a counselor and one other person, I can't remember, just to find out what their concerns are, like once a month. And they discovered that you would learn about things that nobody else would have thought about from those kids, one-on-one with adults, and talking among themselves also kid to kid. And the other thing was, we expect the secretary to greet these new families and these parents, and they're on the intercom, they're getting phone calls from teachers' rooms, they're doing all of these things. And so when a parent comes in with a new child, what do you want? You need to assign someone else, specifically when a new family comes in, so that it's a warm welcome, not a frazzled poor secretary that's trying to do 10 million things all at the same time in the morning. And I would never have thought of that, but that warm greeting, welcoming. They needed to go into a separate room to help them fill out papers rather than in front of a bunch of people. So there are just little things like that you can do that make a huge difference for kids. And having moved around to 11 different schools during my career, I appreciated, I don't think anybody had mobility plans, but there was always a welcoming teacher, administrator, and I appreciated it, and I want that for every kid that's a mobility kid.
I think Patsy and Lisa did a pretty good job of summarizing things, but I was impressed that most of the schools that were represented had some kind of serious mobility plan. On the other hand, I thought it was interesting, and I asked some questions of some of the folks that were there that, with all these students being so mobile, how quickly are you getting their records? And that still seems to be a problem from what I can, and obviously, a kid shows up today that was at another school yesterday, there's not much you can do to forward a record if you didn't know he was gonna do that. But I think that's an issue as we move forward, is finding a way to make sure that these things, in some cases, I was told, well, I sometimes just have to call the school and the other school he's from, and I'll ask them to fax the information to me, or they'll email the information to me. But I think that might be an issue. So that kind of gave me a little more thought process as we go forward with our strategic plan dealing with this issue.
I just want to say one more thing and then pass it on to you, John. But one thing I thought of as I went through this presentation is that it would be a really good program for our ESUs across the state.
Thank you very much, Patsy. Absolutely.
When they talked about these mobile plans, did anybody integrate it to a personalized learning plan concept, a digital backpack that not only would have a plan of where the student was, but where he or she wanted to go, references, because one thing I've heard from my people out west is if you get a new student, you know right away if they qualify for free and reduced lunch, if they're going to eat. But one of our goals is the personalized learning plan, and it's going to be ideal for the mobile students because then the plan goes with the student. And with the digital world, there's no reason it shouldn't. And if that child is preparing for college and career and has been through revision, wouldn't it be cool if they had all those little integrated parts? So did they talk about it at all?
I didn't hear that, not as in a group, not in a general group session, although I think it's a wonderful idea. I also think that sometimes kids don't even know when they're moving. I mean, they're there one day and...
That's why everybody should have one.
Exactly, and it should be accessible to them. So they've got it right there, yeah. It's a great idea, Molly.
Thank you very much, Molly. Patsy, thank you very much. Let's talk about the Martin Luther King Jr. Day, York, Nebraska. Molly, Maureen, Patsy, and Lisa, do you have any comments to add?
I thought it was an absolutely outstanding day. There were over. I thought it was an absolutely outstanding professional learning day. The committee put together fantastic breakout sessions, a lot of them. I wish I could have gone to more, but limited to 3. But there were over 600 educators from different school districts, and the one that I know the furthest away was from Ainsworth. That's quite a drive, and I'm sure there were some that were even further. But there were 2 things I'd like to share that stood out to me that day, and it was a presentation done by the 3 principals, elementary, middle school, and high school there at York. And the title of their session was called The Power of ICU, which stands for Intensive Care Plan, the End of Student Apathy and Reviving Student Responsibility. And it was dealing on, basically, they have software, and there is no student that is not allowed not to complete an assignment. And all teachers are expected to only be giving assignments that are important assignments. And no student gets away without it. And it starts in 3rd grade and goes through senior high. And they know day to day, because the teachers have to put into the program at the end of the day or into their class who hasn't handed in their assignment. And they have seen remarkable progress and decrease. Those students don't think twice about getting their assignments done. So I was sharing that with several administrators at a wrestling meet I was at for 6 hours last Friday in my area. And the other was the keynote guest speaker at the end was absolutely probably one of the most powerful keynote speakers I've ever listened to that I can recall over my career. He had so much to share, but the thing that stood out to me, and again that I shared with these administrators I saw and knew, was his story on every child brings to school with them a backpack. And he had a backpack on in this pretty grungy looking outfit. And he took that backpack off, which looked like a pretty nice backpack. But he said, what teachers and faculty fail to do is to look inside that backpack to pull out the second backpack. And he said, every student has a second backpack. And until the teachers and the administration and those working with those students understand that backpack, will they truly make a real difference with that student? But if you learn about that backpack, you will change that child's life. And that's what happened with him, because he came from the other side of town, the gangs, but a teacher took him in, learned about his second backpack, and now he's one of the most incredible researchers in the United States, top 1% of researchers and speakers and entertainers. But I've shared the story of the 2 backpacks with several administrators, and going to be sending around the books that I purchased afterwards. Very simple, easy, quick reading, but how that really impacted me, and I wish I would have thought about that even as my own classroom.
Thank you.
When I was teaching.
Thank you, Maureen. Appreciate it. Any other comments from attendees? Oh, Molly?
I agree totally with you. And he comes to Nebraska pretty often, so I would hope that any administrator listening to this today get ESUs together and pay for it and do it. There were 600 people there. It will be well worth the money spent. But he talked about kids, my kids did this too. Take a cardboard box, and it can be a spaceship or it can be a boat or, their imaginations. And he said, you're given a box when you go to a school. It's their school rules. Be imaginative and think outside the box to reach those kids with that second backpack. Follow the rules, but find different ways to reach each child. And he kept complimenting, I'm up here on the stage today
because of people like you, public school teachers.
Thank
I
you.
sat up a little prouder.
Thank you very much. Molly, did you have something?
By the way, in case you wanted to know his name was Adolph Brown III. And some of you have seen him speak at NSB or NCSA. What's kind of interesting, and I'm just going to highlight this, is it goes back to our new demographically shifting schools, priority school. I looked around the room, over 600 people. There were 2 people that were black, and one was Adolph Brown, the other one was his nephew. And yet, the conversations that took, his son, yeah. The conversations that took place, though, were really about creating a culture where people who look different than you are welcome. And it was so impactful because at Martin Luther King Day, I had just gotten back from Atlanta where we had had another meeting and went to the Martin Luther King historical site. And so when I looked at the culture of the people in some of your districts, you do have larger segments of black population, is Black lives do matter in Nebraska, and those educators, you could tell they were welcoming each of their students to their class. And I'm just going to highlight one that I don't know if you've ever met Mike Lucas. He's their superintendent. Some of you know him. He talked about a passionate pep talk for educators, and I was surprised how authentic he was. If you ever have a chance to meet Mike Lucas, I'm not going to tell you his story because we're on public air, but he was so honest about his background. He talked about his challenges and about when you come from a family maybe that's on the other side of the track, people didn't always think he had any potential. And he said it was my teachers that made me accountable, that believed in me, that could be more. And he is just amazing. I mean, anytime I see Mike Lucas now, I'm just going to bow my head because he is so cool. And just if you ever can go to the MLK conference in New York, Bobby Truey, you know him, he's with Karen Hassey's group. He talked about First Amendment issues every teacher and administrator should know. And it's really, I don't know, it's just an honor to be there as part of the state board and for us to be there and listen to these really cool people talk about how they can better serve our students. So that was.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you very much. Any other comments?
Because this is one sentence. Okay, one sentence, John. Okay, so he did come in all dressed in a costume with hair and a bandana and sagging pants and all that sort of thing. I have to do the background, then the one sentence. But anyway, he said he liked coming to Nebraska. Do you remember this? Because he could come in and sit down in a chair and people wouldn't act like there was anything at all wrong with him. They just accepted, well, here's this person. And he said other places, when he came in this costume, he would be looked down upon. People might get up and move, kinds of things.
I'm saving the seat.
Yeah, I'm saving this seat. So it was so funny when he said that. And then Maureen got to dance with this
Yes.
girl. Just want you to know she's quite a dancer.
Well, I have to thank the Interdenominational Ministry Alliance in Omaha, Nebraska. They invited Dr. Friesen and I to the Omaha Martin Luther King Day celebration, so thank you very much. Does anybody have any individual? Please, Rachel.
Yeah, I just want to, first of all, give a shout out to South Sioux City and their Milliken Award winner,
Yes.
John Pickenpaugh. That was a great day to be involved in that celebration. And while there, we also had the opportunity to visit Michelle Halt's classroom again and then have lunch with Leadership Dakota County. And they were focusing a session on education. And so it was a great opportunity. Myself and Lieutenant Governor spent a chilly day in South Sioux City.
And thanks to Rachel for covering last minute, by the way, because we were trying to decide, so I really appreciate that.
And you look good on the streaming, that's for sure.
The weather was good up north, so.
Lisa.
I have attended a couple of different a luncheon and informative session on trafficking, human trafficking in Nebraska. And it's a $150 billion criminal industry, second to only the drug cartels. And they target ages 12 to 14. One case was as young as 6. And I just think that this is something that we need to be aware of. People don't even realize that this exists around the World Series, the Buffett big thing in Omaha, they target things like that. So what they're doing, they're starting to train hotel businesses. And there was a lady who is a business traveler, and they're getting business people to be aware of this. You look for signs. There was an airline stewardess that noticed a young gal. She asked her what she wanted to drink, and the guy next to her, at first she thought it was her father, but he was very domineering and wouldn't let her have her own choices. So she went up to the cockpit and reported this, and with inquiry at the end, the guy was arrested. That young girl was being trafficked. This is against their will. It's a form of slavery that we all need to be aware of. We have to realize that it exists, recognize what what to look for, and then report it. It's terrible. The number of kids in this so-called industry in Nebraska.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you
The
very much.
I-80 corridor.
Any others? Patrick?
Yeah, a couple things. I mentioned last month that I had an opportunity to visit with Nancy McCabe at Bellevue University, and I had another chance to visit with her, and they are really interested in becoming a partner or trying to augment us in our efforts regarding civics and social studies, and I hope that we'll take advantage of their desire to do that. The other thing is, I had the opportunity, I was asked to be a guest at an event, Content of Character, that was held on 2 Saturdays ago, and it's and over 2 years this has been going on and been launched. It was launched a year ago in February. It's a nationwide coalition of black leaders and pastors assembled, and they go across the country talking about things, about issues, and it was originally based on a book, The Black History of America, Setting the Record Straight. And it was a great opportunity to hear 8 speakers, but one of the interesting things there that I thought was really interesting and exciting was they awarded a Heroes of Faith Award to Thomas Lee, the principal of Northwest High School in Omaha, Nebraska.
Awesome.
And just to read this very quickly, the Content and Character series has honored Thomas Lee with the 2018 Hero of Faith Award for his tireless work and generosity to the community, multiple organizations, and to his commitment to public education and athletics. Mr. Lee has 28 years in education, including physical education, coaching, dean of students, assistant principal, and athletic director. He's currently the principal at Omaha Northwest High. And it says, and his comments was, I've been blessed throughout my entire career, all because of my personal relationship with God, and I truly believe He walks with me daily as I lead an awesome staff and students at Northwest High Magnet School. And so it was really a great opportunity, and Congressman Bacon was there, and it was a great opportunity, I thought, to be there, and I think we could all benefit from.
Thank you, Patrick.
that kind of thing.
Molly, did you have something?
Yeah, I was one of the, just a couple people that went to the NSB Legislative Issues Conference. I live far away, of course, and I don't know if you remember this, but on January 21st, there was a huge blizzard. And my husband said, you better get out like at 8:30 before the storm hit. So I ended up getting there, and it was interesting, and some of us have been talking about how legislative times really brings out 2 different issues. How do you spend less money? How do you prioritize how you spend money? And then the other flip of the coin is, how do you build your revenue stream? And just for a moment of interest, I might share with you, the 6 p.m. Reception on Sunday, Colby Coash came and talked, and he said, change the narrative to get results. And there are things I hadn't really thought about. We've all heard about internet sales, like maybe, I think Amazon now is gathering Nebraska tax. But he said, really that's a lot of lost revenue when the mom and pop stores close their concrete stores, and people now are just buying things that come to their doorstep. He also said Nebraska could start making money on hemp, sales of hemp. And it's not really the THC that gets people high, but I guess you can make a lot of clothing and things like that. And they called it ditchweed. Anyway, I was just thinking to myself, well, I suppose, thinking about different kinds of economy might be a good idea to build our revenue stream. Just briefly, I was going to tell you when Speaker Jim Scheer came the next day on Monday, Pete Ricketts got there and he beat the storm. He kind of was late, but he beat the storm. And Senator Bob Christ came and he talked about his ideas if he should be governor. And that was kind of interesting to hear both their concepts about how to live fiscally responsibly while still honoring education. Jim Scheer said any bill with a fiscal note's not going to get passed. And I was really hoping maybe there'd be some conversation about maybe we're funding things now we shouldn't be, and then we should prioritize our expenditures, even if they're new bills, if they fit in with the strategic plan and of the state and in education in particular. Senator Groney, Chairman of Education Committee, he did come and he had a nice conversation with us in his region for the lunch with the senators. And John Stinner, what I just wanted to say for those of you that don't know John Stinner, he's out west, and I asked him once about his daily kind of service to Nebraska. He said a lot of times he gets up at 4:30 in the morning and starts working on the budget, and he works long hours late into the night. And I'm highlighting John Stinner because I'm sure some of our other senators work above and beyond the $12,000 they make a year. And Senator Lynn Waltz was also a featured speaker. And if you ever have time to talk to her, she is amazing. She really understands what we're doing. Who is her in her?
She's in Dodge County, Fremont.
Oh my gosh.
Former classroom teacher.
She is amazing. And
thank you,
anyway,
Molly.
I want to tell you, even though I was one of the few people there, Patsy and I sat together at one point, and I learned something every new when I go to NASB, and I did want to let you know there's some area in NASB legislative meetings. And my only comment to you, John, is I really think that NASB, they have a legislative committee, and if in fact our legislative committee could meet with them in conjunction, a lot of times you're more powerful if you bring partners together and speak on legislative bills that advance the best for every student every day.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you very much. Well, thank you I went to various stakeholder meetings this past month. Very great to have attended. And so thank you, everyone. We'll start with individual reports. If you have anything further to report, you passed. Tomorrow there'll be no vote on request to approve attendance at meetings that took place in the past and were not previously approved unless there are any members that attended such meetings. Next, the request for future meetings attendance travel from board members are linked to Spark meetings. If you have any additional travel requirements that need to be approved, please complete the State Board travel request form in your board folder and submit them to Ryan before tomorrow. Tomorrow we will approve the board request for meeting attendance. The monthly board travel expense report is attached in the Spark meetings for your review. Does anybody have anything else? Nothing. Commissioner? We are adjourned. The regularly scheduled meeting of the State Board of Education will convene tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock in this room. Thank you.